I filmed Diddy's secret party, and what I saw that night made me swear silence. What was supposed to be a glamorous, unforgettable event quickly turned into a nightmare I couldn't escape. Behind the flashing lights and the celebrity smiles, there was something far darker happening. Something Diddy had been hiding for years. I was just the unfortunate person who accidentally uncovered it. And now, I'm paying the price for knowing the truth. But what happened that night? You're about to find out. It came out of nowhere, a message that hit my inbox like a bolt of lightning. No warning, no build-up, just the words. Be there. You won't want to miss it. And there it was. Diddy's name flashing across the screen, accompanied by a cryptic invite. The kind of message that screamed, "This is big." It didn't take long for me to make up my mind. An exclusive invite to film one of Diddy's legendary private parties? Who could say no to that? At first, I thought it was just another one of his VIP-only events. Flashy, fun, and filled with celebrities. The kind of thing you hear about but never experience. But the second I stepped inside, it was clear. This wasn't just any party. I thought I knew what I was walking into. A high-end bash with champagne, music, and dancing. But I was dead wrong. The place was massive, almost too massive. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a compound, like something built to hide secrets. As I walked through the entrance, I could feel the weight of it. The mansion stretched out in front of me, its walls lined with pristine, expensive art. Everything meticulously arranged. But the air was thick, almost suffocating. The silence wasn't the kind of stillness that comforts you. It was heavy, like something was being held back. The front door shut behind me with a sound that felt far too final, like locking myself into something I could never escape. I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and music from somewhere deep inside, but it wasn't the joyous noise I had imagined. It was wrong. The laughter sounded strained, like a mask being forced on, and the music wasn't a beat. It was a pulse, a low hum that made my skin crawl. I didn't know why, but I felt watched. I shook it off, convinced I was just imagining things. Still, every time I moved, every time I turned a corner, the feeling wouldn't leave. Like there were eyes on me, or worse, like there was something in that house that knew I wasn't supposed to be there. I walked deeper into the house, and that's when I first caught a glimpse of the people, not celebrities you'd expect. No, this wasn't just a star-studded gathering. These were people who had that look in their eyes. The look of someone who's seen too much. They were all acting like they were part of a well-rehearsed show, nodding to each other with this almost knowing glance, like they weren't just guests. They were actors in something bigger. At first, Diddy wasn't anywhere to be seen, but the guests were buzzing with anticipation. No one seemed to care who I was or why I was there. Everyone had one thing on their mind, their eyes darting towards the back of the house, the doors that led deeper into the mansion. There was one thing I couldn't shake. There was something off about the way everyone was acting. This wasn't just about fun. It wasn't even just about business. There was a purpose to this night that no one was saying aloud. I should have left right then. I should have walked out that door and never looked back. But I didn't. I stayed, thinking I could just film, get my footage, and leave with a story to tell. But this was no ordinary party. And I had no idea what I was walking into. Little did I know, The moment I stepped into that mansion, the night was already spinning out of control. The truth about what was really happening here was far darker than I could have ever imagined. The longer I stayed, the more the house began to feel like a prison. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just the odd, overwhelming vibe of a mansion on a scale I'd never been in before. But the deeper I went, the more I realized it wasn't just the size, it was something else. The entire atmosphere of the place had a cold, oppressive weight. It wasn't welcoming, it wasn't homey, it was foreboding. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the endless halls that seemed to stretch into infinity, everything about this place screamed power. But not the kind of power you flaunt. No, this felt like the kind of power that was built on control, secrecy, and manipulation. And that feeling started to sink in. The further I moved into the house, the more I started to notice the little things. The tiny details that felt wrong. The staff, there were too many of them, and they all had the same unsettling look. They weren't smiling. They didn't greet you like a normal staff would. Their faces were almost expressionless, as if they were all in on something I wasn't supposed to know. I tried not to look at them for too long. I could feel their eyes following me, watching my every move, but I didn't want to look too suspicious. I found myself standing in what seemed like the main entertainment area. High ceilings, velvet couches, the soft glow of gold lights. It was the kind of room you see in movies, but here it felt lifeless, empty, even with people everywhere. The guests weren't engaged. They weren't laughing or talking like I'd expected. They were waiting for something, for someone. Their eyes kept darting toward the back of the house, to a set of doors. That's when I started to feel it, this invisible pull. It wasn't just the guests who were focused on those doors, it was everyone. I didn't know why, but the moment I stepped into that room, I felt like the entire mansion was breathing. It wasn't just a party. It was a setup, a waiting game, a place where everything was planned down to the finest detail. I glanced around, and for the first time, I began to realize that none of these people were just partygoers. They were all connected. No one was here just for the fun of it. Some of them were too important, too cold, to even glance my way. Their eyes never met mine. And if they did, it was with that strange, almost disconnected look. Like they weren't seeing me. They were seeing someone else. It wasn't long before I saw him, the man who ran this place. Diddy. The man everyone had been waiting for. He stepped into the room like a king entering his throne room, and for a moment, everything stopped. The noise, the chatter, the energy, everything froze. He moved with an authority that was unnatural, like the world had to stop for him. But it wasn't just the guests who fell silent. It was like the entire mansion fell silent too. His presence filled the space, even when he didn't say a word. He smiled and nodded, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was calculated. And the way the guests reacted to him, it was different. They weren't excited. They weren't eager to meet him. They were afraid. They were subdued, like people who knew their place in a world far darker than they were willing to admit. Diddy's eyes scanned the room, but they didn't focus on anyone in particular. His gaze seemed to pierce right through people, like he was looking at something beyond them, something none of us could see. And it wasn't just the people, it was the air itself. He commanded the space with the kind of power that made you feel small. made you feel like you were nothing more than a pawn in a game you didn't understand. I could feel the tension in the room shift. The excitement was gone. No one was here for a good time anymore. Everyone had an agenda. Everyone was waiting for something. What that something was, I had no idea yet. But I knew I had to figure it out. I followed him as he moved through the crowd. I didn't want to be obvious, but I couldn't resist. There was something magnetic about him, something terrifying. There was more to Diddy than the public persona everyone saw. The more I observed, the more I realized he wasn't just a businessman or a music mogul. He was a leader in a world I didn't even know existed. As I trailed behind him, I found myself in the center of a strange, intimate circle. The people here weren't just followers. They were servants, but not in the way you'd think. These weren't people waiting to be told what to do. They were watching him, waiting for a command, for something to happen. The room grew cold, and for the first time, I started to feel a creeping dread. I tried to stay invisible. I didn't want to draw attention, but my gut was screaming at me. Leave. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. The longer I stayed in that room, the more I realized I wasn't just filming a party. I was documenting something far more dangerous. Diddy wasn't the only one with power in this room. The other people here, some of them were dangerous. They had that look in their eyes, that calculated look that told me they were part of something bigger. Something that had nothing to do with music or fame. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing. This wasn't a celebration. This wasn't about fun. This was about control. And I was beginning to see that Diddy wasn't just holding the reins. He was the puppet master in a world I was only beginning to understand. But the more I saw, the more I realized Diddy wasn't the only one with a dark secret. The mansion held answers. Answers that I wasn't prepared for. As the night stretched on, I couldn't ignore the unease crawling up my spine. The mansion felt more like a waiting room than a place of celebration, and the guests were becoming more and more unnerving. At first, I thought they were just the typical Hollywood crowd, used to the spotlight, always on their best behavior. But the longer I observed, the more I realized that something was terribly off. The women wore gowns that shimmered under the dim lights, their faces cold with painted smiles. The men, sharp in their suits, stood in groups, whispering to each other as if they were sharing secrets they didn't want anyone else to hear. And then there were the eyes. It wasn't just the way they looked at me. It was the way they looked at each other, as if everyone in that room shared a bond, something hidden, something untouchable. I moved through the crowd, trying to get a better read on the situation. But no matter how many people I passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I wasn't a guest here. I was an outsider, and every person in this room knew it. Their glances were brief but deliberate. They knew I didn't belong, and they made sure I knew it too. Some of them were familiar faces. Music producers, actors, people I had seen on TV or heard about in the tabloids. But there was something about them, something in the way they carried themselves, that told me they weren't just there for business. These weren't people whose primary concern was the next big hit. These were people who had already made their fortunes, who had already crossed lines that no one should ever cross. They had seen things. They had done things. But it wasn't just their eyes that gave it away. It was the way they moved. There was an eerie stillness to their actions, like they were always calculating the next step in some twisted game. The conversations weren't light. They weren't about movies, music, or business. They were about power. They spoke in cryptic phrases as if using codes only they understood. Every word seemed weighed with hidden meaning, and I couldn't make sense of it. One group caught my attention in particular. They were standing in a small circle, speaking in hushed voices. I caught a snippet of their conversation, a phrase that sent a chill through my body. "We can't let him do it again." The way they said it wasn't like a casual remark. It was like they were talking about something far more significant than a mere business deal. The mention of him stuck with me, but I couldn't figure out who they were talking about. My first thought was Diddy, but the way they spoke made it seem like there was someone else involved. Someone whose identity had been deliberately hidden. My curiosity pushed me forward, and without even realizing it, I had moved closer to the circle. The group didn't notice me standing there, but their conversation was becoming clearer. "She'll be the last," one of them said, a voice low and dangerous. "After this, it's over. No more mistakes." A sense of dread settled in my gut, but I couldn't tear myself away. Who were they talking about? What were they planning? The air around me grew heavier, as if the very walls of the mansion were closing in on me. I wanted to back away, to disappear into the crowd, but I couldn't. Something was compelling me to stay, to find out more. As I took a step back, I collided with someone, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit. He turned, his eyes narrowing for a split second, and I could see it in his gaze. He knew exactly what I had overheard. He didn't say a word, but his stare sent a jolt of panic through me. His presence was suffocating, like he had the ability to control the room with just a look. "Careful," he said quietly, his voice cold as ice. "Don't listen to things you weren't meant to hear." He said it so calmly, but I could feel the threat hidden beneath. This wasn't a warning. It was a command. And it wasn't just directed at me. It was directed at everyone in the room. I tried to mask my shock, offering a weak smile as I stepped back, but he didn't look away. His eyes followed me for a few moments longer, and I could feel the weight of them pressing into my back as I moved. Every step I took away from him felt like I was running out of time, like there was something waiting to happen, something inevitable. By this point, I was desperate to make sense of what was unfolding. I needed answers. I couldn't just stand there trying to figure out the details in between cryptic phrases and loaded stares. I wanted to know the truth about this night. The real reason these people were here, why they were so tense, and why they were afraid to speak plainly. I caught sight of Diddy again, and this time, he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a small group of people who seemed to be waiting for his signal. It was like he was orchestrating something, directing the flow of the evening. His demeanor had changed from the charismatic showman I had seen earlier to someone far more calculating. His eyes scanned the room as though he was anticipating the next move in a game I couldn't understand. And then it hit me. This party wasn't just a celebration of success. It was a carefully constructed charade, a facade hiding something much darker. The tension in the air, the secrecy, the fear. It wasn't about business. It wasn't even about Diddy's career. It was about something much more dangerous. Something from Diddy's past that no one in that room could ever let slip. I knew then that the answers I was looking for weren't just in the conversation I had overheard. They were in Diddy's past, and I was getting closer to uncovering something that could destroy everything. I had been there for hours, but it felt like time was bending, stretching, and warping in ways I couldn't quite explain. The mansion wasn't a place where time made sense. It was like a maze, where every hallway led to another. Every room contained something darker than the last. I had already overheard enough to know this was more than just a party, more than just a social gathering. There was something much more sinister at play. By this point, I was feeling the weight of every strange look, every whisper, every shiver down my spine. But it wasn't just paranoia, it was real. Every turn, every new face I encountered made me feel like I was being pulled deeper into a web I didn't understand. And every instinct told me I needed to get out of there. But leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left now, I would be turning my back on something huge. Something that could change everything. I slipped down a hallway, hoping to find a moment to breathe, to clear my mind, but I was still too tense. The atmosphere was stifling. Every room I entered felt like a dead end. Every door I opened led to more unanswered questions. I thought about what I'd overheard earlier, the cryptic conversations, the mention of him, the vague threats, and it only made my heart race faster. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like the house itself was aware of my every move. Every step felt heavier, every breath tighter. And then I heard it, a low murmur coming from the other side of a door. At first I thought I was imagining things. The house was old, creaky, and full of noises that could easily be mistaken for whispers. But no, this was different. It wasn't just the sound of the house settling. This was deliberate. Someone was talking, and they didn't want to be heard. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out the words. The voices were muffled, but I could hear enough to know this wasn't a casual conversation. The tone was tense, urgent even. There was an unmistakable weight in the air. The kind of heaviness you feel when something important is about to happen. Something dangerous. I managed to catch a few words. "It's happening tonight," one voice said. "We can't afford another mistake. He won't survive this time." He? My heart skipped a beat. Who were they talking about? My thoughts spun wildly, but I couldn't piece it together yet. I had to know more. I needed answers, but the closer I got to the truth, the more terrified I became. It was like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff, knowing that if you took one wrong step, you'd fall into something you couldn't escape from. I stepped away from the door, my mind racing. I needed to find out who was behind these whispers. Who was the he they were talking about? But before I could make my move, the door creaked open. A figure stepped into the hallway, their face hidden in the shadows, but I could feel their presence. This person wasn't just a guest, they were part of the plan. They weren't a part of the party. They were part of the operation. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The last thing I wanted was to be seen, but the figure didn't even glance my way. They walked right past me, as if I wasn't even there, but their body language told a different story. They were watching. Their movements were deliberate, calculated, and as they passed, I caught a glimpse of their eyes. Cold, dead eyes. It was like they had no soul, no conscience. They were just a cog in whatever dark machine was running this place. I couldn't help it. I followed them, silently slipping through the hallways, desperate to find out where they were going. The deeper I ventured, the more I realized just how far I had gone into the heart of the mansion's darkness. It wasn't just the decor or the strange energy. It was the people. They were all connected, moving like a well-oiled machine. They were a part of something much bigger than a party, and I was in over my head. Finally, I reached the back of the mansion, where the doors I had seen earlier were located. There was a heaviness to the air, a palpable tension that made my skin crawl. The figure I had followed stood in front of a door, talking to someone I couldn't see. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way they stood, the way their posture was so rigid, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a deal. That's when I saw him. Diddy. His presence was unmistakable, even from behind. He was surrounded by a small group of people, all standing with their heads slightly bowed, like they were waiting for a command. Diddy didn't speak at first. He just stood there, his back straight, his posture perfect. But the air in the room shifted. The tension was intolerable. He finally turned to face the person I had been following, and I could see it in his eyes. Something was wrong. Diddy wasn't the man I had seen at the front of the house, the charismatic star. This man was cold, calculating. He was a man who had made deals with people who weren't afraid of crossing lines. He wasn't here for fun or games. He was here to settle something that had been waiting for a long time. I realized then that the whispers weren't just rumors. The truth I was getting closer to was something that could destroy everything Diddy had built. His world wasn't just about music or business. It was about power. And the cost of that power was steep. Too steep for anyone to walk away from. I didn't know it yet, but the deal Diddy was about to make would set the stage for everything that was coming next. A deal that would bind him to the very darkness I was beginning to uncover. By the time the night had stretched into the early hours of the morning, I was no longer sure of what was real. The house, the people, the energy, it was all a blur of confusion, fear, and tension. But there was one thing I was certain of. Something was about to happen. Something that I wasn't prepared for. Diddy had been moving through the crowd with a strange, almost robotic precision. The guests followed him like shadows, barely speaking, their faces drawn and tight. There was no music now, just the hum of distant voices, the sound of whispers curling in the corners of the house. Everyone was on edge. The closer I followed him, the more I realized that this wasn't just a party. It was the final piece of something larger. A plan that had been set into motion long before I had even arrived. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that Diddy wasn't just running this night. He was controlled by it. He was the puppet in the center of this intricate web, and as the night wore on, he seemed more like a man on the verge of collapse than a confident mogul. His movements were jerky, his smiles forced. He wasn't in control of the situation anymore. The situation was in control of him. I found myself standing outside one of the private rooms, trying to make sense of what I had seen. There were guests entering and leaving, all moving with the same eerie stillness. Everyone seemed to have a role to play. No one was there to enjoy themselves. They were all waiting for something, following a script I couldn't yet understand. That's when I saw the door open, and I heard Diddy's voice, calm but tinged with something darker. It was a conversation I wasn't meant to overhear. "It has to happen tonight," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I can't keep running. I can't let it happen again." The words made no sense to me at first. What was he talking about? Running? What was so bad that he couldn't let it happen again? But then the door closed, and I was left standing there with my own questions unanswered. I knew I had to get closer, but fear had already begun to gnaw at me. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answers anymore. I could feel the darkness in the room press against me, suffocating me. I pushed forward, the need for answers burning inside me. I couldn't just walk away. I had to see this through. When I entered the room, everything I thought I knew about Diddy and the party fell apart. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a celebration. It was a meeting, a secret meeting where the real decisions were being made. Diddy wasn't in charge anymore. There were people in that room, people I didn't recognize, who had the power. They were pulling the strings, and Diddy was nothing more than a puppet in their hands. The people in the room weren't the stars or the moguls I had seen earlier. They were different, cold, emotionless, and far more dangerous. One of them looked up as I entered, and his gaze made my heart race. His eyes locked on mine, and I could tell he knew exactly who I was. He wasn't just looking at me like a guest or a film crew member. Well, he was looking at me like I was an intruder, a threat to whatever was going on in that room. For a moment, no one said anything. The tension was unbearable. I could feel it in my bones. They were waiting for something to happen. And then Diddy spoke again, his voice shaking slightly, as if he was about to make a decision he couldn't take back. "It's done," he said, but his voice cracked. "This time, it has to be done. There's no turning back." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew one thing. Whatever had happened, whatever decision had been made, it was too late to stop. The truth was out there, buried deep beneath layers of secrecy, and I was just starting to scratch the surface. The air in the room grew thick with dread, as though something ancient had been awakened. There was a sense of finality in the way Diddy spoke. Whatever had been set in motion couldn't be undone. There was no going back. I stood frozen in place, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn around, run, and pretend I had never stepped foot inside that mansion. But I knew I couldn't. I had come too far. The secrets that Diddy and his guests were hiding were about to come to light, and I had to be there to see it. I still had no idea what I had just walked into, but I knew one thing for sure. The moment I stepped into that room, everything was about to change. Diddy's dark secret was finally coming to the surface, and the fallout would be devastating. By the time the chaos started, I realized how much I had underestimated the situation. The tension that had been building all night wasn't just the result of nerves or drama. It was the calm before a storm. And when the storm hit, it hit like a tidal wave. I'd barely registered Diddy's final words when the first scream echoed through the halls. It wasn't a scream of fear or shock. It was a scream of desperation. A sharp, blood-curdling sound that made every hair on my body stand up. The entire atmosphere shifted in an instant. The stillness, the calm, was gone. The air was thick with panic now, and everyone in the room knew it. I turned toward the source of the scream, and I saw people running, Guests were darting from one room to another, pushing and shoving to get away from something or someone. I didn't understand what was happening, but I didn't need to. All I knew was that the terror I had been feeling for hours had just been confirmed. Whatever Diddy was involved in, it was bigger than anything I could have imagined. I didn't know where to go, but my instincts kicked in. I had to get out. This wasn't just a party anymore. It was a trap, a calculated trap, and I had unwittingly walked right into it. I pushed my way through the chaos, desperately trying to find an exit. But every door I tried was locked. The mansion, once so grand and inviting, now felt like a maze. Every hallway led to a dead end. The whispers from earlier, the ones I had brushed off, had turned into shouts, and the people around me weren't just panicking. They were fighting, struggling, trying to escape something they couldn't control. Diddy was nowhere to be found. For a moment, I thought maybe he had escaped, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whatever was happening here had his fingerprints all over it. He wasn't just a part of it. He was at the center. And what I had seen, that decision he made in the room, had just unleashed whatever nightmare had been festering beneath the surface. I could hear footsteps behind me, rapid and heavy. Someone was following me, but I didn't dare look back. The last thing I needed was for one of Diddy's people to catch up with me. I wasn't sure who was more dangerous at this point. The people trapped inside, or the ones who were orchestrating the chaos from the shadows. I finally found a side door, one that had been tucked away behind a row of old portraits. It creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the cold night air outside. The mansion, once so imposing, seemed almost vulnerable now. The sprawling grounds that had felt so ominous earlier were now a brief escape, but I knew it wouldn't last long. My heart was pounding as I sprinted across the lawn, not looking back for a single second. But even as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was right behind me, just out of sight. I wanted to believe it was just paranoia, but the more I ran, the more I felt that undeniable presence. I wasn't just running away from the mansion. I was running away from something that had followed me out into the night. And when I finally reached my car, I hesitated. I could have driven away. I could have left it all behind. But something told me that would never be enough. Whatever had happened in that house was never gonna leave me. I was already in too deep. The truth, no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, was out there. And I was the one who had uncovered it. As I drove away, I couldn't escape the feeling that I wasn't just running from the mansion. I was running from the truth. And the truth was something I couldn't outrun, no matter how fast I tried to go. I never spoke about what happened that night, and I never will. The decision wasn't just about fear, it was about survival. The truth I uncovered in that mansion wasn't something I could easily walk away from. The people involved, Diddy included, had far more power than I could ever comprehend. And for me to speak about what I saw would be to invite a danger I wasn't prepared for. The weeks after that night were a blur. I tried to go back to my normal life to pretend that nothing had changed, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of the people in that mansion. I could still hear the chaos, the fear, the screams of people who had no way out. It haunted me, every minute of every day. The weight of the secret sat heavily on my chest, and there was no escaping it. I had made the mistake of looking too deep, of pulling on threads I wasn't supposed to. The moment I stepped foot into that mansion, I became part of a world that wasn't meant for me. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I wanted to forget, I couldn't escape it. I never went back to that mansion. I never contacted anyone from that night. The people who had been there were gone, just like the night itself had vanished into the dark. The mansion stood empty now, or at least that's what I was told. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house, with all its secrets, still held its grip on me. That if I ever went near it again, I'd be pulled back into whatever nightmare had started there. I kept to myself. I distanced myself from everyone. The fear of being watched, of being followed, didn't go away. It became a constant shadow, lurking behind everything I did. Even now, I look over my shoulder. Even now, I feel like someone is waiting. I never told anyone what I saw, not a single person. Every time I thought about speaking up, the memory of that night, the faces, the voices, the cold terror stopped me. I knew too much, more than I should have ever known. Diddy's secret, the real one, wasn't meant for anyone else to find out. And the people who were involved, they didn't just keep secrets, they kept people silent. I'd been given a choice that night, a choice to walk away, to pretend I never saw what I did. But the price of that silence was more than I could ever explain. The truth I had uncovered was so much darker than I had imagined, and there was no going back. The people in that house, they weren't just hiding a secret, they were keeping it buried. And the only way to keep that secret safe was to make sure no one talked. Not me, not anyone. I used to think that one day I'd be able to live with it. That one day the memory would fade and I could pretend it didn't happen. But now I know that's not how it works. You can't unsee things like that. You can't forget what you were never meant to know. And as much as I want to pretend I'm free, I know I'm not. The silence I carry is a burden I'll never shake off. And every time I hear a name, see a face, or hear the faintest whisper about that night, I wonder, what if the truth isn't finished yet? What if it's just waiting to come back? The silence isn't just mine to keep. One day, someone else will uncover it. And when they do, they'll have to live with the consequences, just like I did. The night I spent in that mansion was only the beginning. What I uncovered there isn't just a secret. It's a dangerous truth. Diddy's world isn't what you see on the surface. It's a carefully crafted illusion, built on fear, control, and things that shouldn't be spoken of. I thought I could walk away, pretend I hadn't seen what I did, but the truth follows you. It haunts you. No matter how much I wanted to forget, I couldn't. The people who were there, Diddy, the guests, the ones pulling the strings, are still out there, living in the shadows. And what's even more terrifying, I'm not the only one who knows. The secret isn't buried. It's just waiting. I don't know when it will resurface, but when it does, the world will finally see what's been hidden in plain sight, and no one will be safe.